Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar on Hindsight is 2020, Lessons Learned from Cancer and Aging Research on Submitting an NIH Grant. My name is Jennifer, and I will be your WebEx host. Before we get started, I'd like to make a few comments. All lines have been muted upon entry and will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Please submit your questions throughout the presentation in the chat or Q&A panel and select all panelists from the drop-down. We will ask them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you need to view live closed captioning, please refer to the link that will appear in the chat panel. We will be asking a few poll questions during the webinar. You can find the poll panel in the right-hand portion of your WebEx screen. Once you've selected your responses, please hit submit. I'd also like to note that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted online at a later date. And now I'd like to turn it over to Paige Green to introduce our webinar series and our speakers.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the National Cancer Institute, we're really honored to present Perspectives on Cancer and Aging, a webinar series that honors the legacy of Dr. Arti Hurria. She was the most esteemed leader in geriatric oncology, and she was serving as the chair of the NCI Cancer and Accelerated Aging Initiative Scientific Steering Committee when she died unexpectedly in 2018. To honor her service contributions to the NCI mission and highlight her legacy as a most impassioned clinician and researcher, we established this webinar series to communicate NCI's broad interest in cancer and aging research and prime new networking and collaboration opportunities among researchers and clinicians. Moreover, to honor Arti's passion for mentorship and junior faculty career development, our webinars usually feature scientific influences at the tenured and junior academic or clinical levels. Today, however, we have reserved this platform for three esteemed leaders to share their lessons learned as accomplished R01 level investigators with a grant portfolio relevant to aging in a cancer context. Dr. Irwin is one of the world's foremost experts on the psychoneuroimmunological pathways by which psychosocial and behavioral factors influence health and disease. He holds the Norman Cousins Distinguished Professorship in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Science at the UCLA Geffen School of Medicine. He's Vice Chair of Research for the Department of Psychiatry at UCLA and Director of the Cousins Center for Psychoneuroimmunology at the UCLA Seminole Institute and Director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at the UCLA Seminole Institute. His research aims to understand the reciprocal interactions between the immune and central nervous system, the role of behavior and inflammatory signaling pathways that influence depression in cancer survivors and older adults. And given that sleep disturbance and insomnia are ubiquitous, especially after cancer diagnosis and treatment, his current efforts are examining how insomnia induces adverse trajectories in disease risk, how they activate inflammatory biology, and relevant to our topic today, accelerate cellular aging in cancer survivors. His research has been supported continuously for over 25 years by his PI leadership of 30, that's right, 30 R01 awards from the NIH. Dr. Supriya Mohile is the Philip and Marilyn Wyherm, I might have gotten that wrong, Professor of Medicine in the Division of Hematology and Oncology at the Wilmot Cancer Institute. She is board certified geriatrician and oncologist and has developed a clinical and research program in geriatric oncology. She leads the cancer care delivery research efforts at her institution's research base. She is an expert in geriatric oncology with over 200 publications and serves as editor-in-chief of the Journal of Geriatric Oncology. She is chair for the ASCO Geriatric Oncology Clinical Guideline Panel, and she received ASCO's B.J. Kennedy Award in 2018. She's also the recipient of NIH grants, such as the K-24, which provides effort to mentor early career faculty interested in geriatric oncology. And importantly, she is one of the multiple PIs of an NIA R21 and R33 grant, which has developed a national infrastructure for the Cancer and Aging Research Group. And if you don't know about that research group, please find out about it. Dr. Kerri Winters-Stone is an exercise scientist by training and the Elnora Thompson Distinguished Professor in the Oregon Health and Science University School of Nursing. She's also co-director of the Knight Community Partnership Program and co-program leader of the Cancer Prevention and Control Program for Oregon's Knight Cancer Institute, which is an NCI designated comprehensive cancer center. For the last 15 years, her research has focused on the effects of cancer treatment on musculoskeletal and neuromuscular health and the use of exercise as a countermeasure to reduce falls and fractures and optimize functioning in cancer survivors. She recently completed a large randomized controlled trial of fall prevention exercises in aging women treated with chemotherapy and currently has 2 NCI-funded clinical exercise trials of fall prevention exercise in prostate cancer survivors. Her team also recently received an NCI supplement to develop infrastructure to use digital technology to better study cancer and aging. So those are 3 esteemed speakers. And I'll end my introduction of our webinar with a quote from The Little Prince that so aptly describes Arti's conviction as an oncologist that cared deeply about helping older adults with cancer. People have forgotten this truth, the fox said, but you mustn't forget it. You become responsible forever for what you've tamed. You're responsible for your rose. Arti felt responsible for the health and well-being of every one of her patients. She is quoted as saying, "Love your patients as much as you can. Give them as much as you can with all your heart. They are in a vulnerable place, and kindness and compassion go such a long way." With NCI support, we hope to help you go swiftly into the future, preparing and submitting significant, innovative, and meritorious research grant applications that together form an evidence base that brings Arti's vision of improving outcomes for older adults with cancer into practice. So with that, I think we will transition to our polling questions and start our chat with our 3 distinguished speakers. Okay. All right. I think we're also going to switch our video layout so that you see primarily our 3 distinguished speakers, along with Lisa and myself, who will moderate the discussion. Is that what you all are currently seeing?
Right now, it's good now.
Okay, great.
And I do want to mention, if I could interject, that participants should be asking questions throughout the hour and should not wait till the end. There will be no dedicated Q&A session. I'll be asking questions on the participants' behalf throughout the webinar.
Yes, thank you for adding that, Lisa. So this really is a session for those of you that are in attendance. While we have, written our own questions, we really do want this to serve those of you that are attending. But besides that, let me get started and ask our panelists if they can talk a little bit about how you first became interested in cancer and aging research. How did you identify aging aspects of cancer as an area you wanted to pursue? And let me give Dr. Kerri Winters-Stone the first opportunity to answer this question.
Okay, thank you, and appreciate being here. I'd say I had a bit of a sideways path into cancer and aging because my primary research interest and training was in osteoporosis prevention and how we use exercise to prevent falls and fractures. And then I came to collaborate with an oncology nurse scientist who was interested in learning how exercise could help manage symptoms, but then began to become more interested as we understood more about the long-term health impacts of cancer treatment on expanding beyond treatment and wanting to look at what are some of the long-term health consequences. And we knew that fractures were potentially elevated in people receiving certain types of cancer treatment. So I came on kind of as a multidisciplinary team to bring an exercise expertise to oncology nursing science. And then I began to, kind of transfer the knowledge that I had already to specifically study osteoporosis and fracture development associated with cancer treatment. So it was kind of interesting that for me, I was brought on as a team member, not with oncology expertise, but really in aging and a different chronic illness. But then I started to become really interested in a lot of the gaps in knowledge around fracture prevention, and even understanding that falls were should be considered as a part of this picture based on what we knew of fall etiology in people without cancer. So then I started to kind of squarely focus in trying to learn more about oncology and develop my own team, and then start to kind of squarely sit in that space where I felt there were a lot of unmet needs.
Great. Great. So some key words that I'm just picking up from your response are the importance of collaboration, of multidisciplinary teams, and also the opportunity to apply your training, which was initially focused in another condition or disease context, to oncology when thinking about older adults. Great. All right. Mike, why don't we transition to you so that you can give your perspectives?
So my interest in cancer really began when I arrived at UCLA nearly 20 years ago and was invited by some of the people that were working in the Johnson Comprehensive Cancer Center to begin to look at behavioral issues in relationship to cancer survivorship, and namely Julie Bauer, who was a collaborator, now a very strong collaborator of mine, and also Patricia Gantz. And so during that, 10 or 15 years I was working in that area, I was really impressed with the high prevalence of depression, sleep problems, and fatigue, particularly impacting cancer survivors who are older. But what got me really focused on the role of aging in cancer was I attended a conference actually at Harvard, probably in 2014, 2013, that was examining issues on aging. And one of the speakers, actually two of the speakers, I was talking about sleep and inflammation problems in aging. But one of the speakers was Liz Blackburn, and she had just won the Nobel Prize right before that, and she just presented this really compelling data showing that this age-related acceleration of telomere attrition was present, and also parallel data showing that inflammation also was increasing as people aged. And one of the questions that was raised by the audience and by all of us is, has any study looked at both inflammation and telomere changes simultaneously? And the answer was no, and it provided us an opportunity to ask really, what's the chicken and what's the egg? Is inflammation driving the cellular aging, the molecular aging, or is it just co-occurring? But also really relevant, because I'm a psychiatrist, was there's a lot of variability, and you look at these data and some people do show that accelerated aging and some people don't. And what are the factors? And clearly genetic factors play a role, but behavioral factors also, I thought, or I hypothesized, would also play a role, and began to really dig into that literature. And out of that, sort of recruited a young person to our group, Jude Carroll, who then came and began to look at telomere processes. And so I began to talk with her a lot about our work in inflammation and telomere changes. And then we developed studies where we could actually begin to look in a prospective way at how depression history, sleep problems might contribute to accelerated inflammation and changes in telomere attrition. And I'll get into a little bit why we focused on that and the preliminary data that we obtained to develop that R01. But that's how I got very much engaged in this study. It was over several years and a lot of interactions with a lot of people, and also networking with people at a national level.
Mhm. Great. And what I've also heard from you is the power of inspiration, right? That, regardless of our academic trajectory, we can always be inspired or have our research sort of take a new level based on something that you hear from a colleague and luminary in the field. So that is very encouraging as well. All right. So, Supriya, why don't we turn to you? Because you are the card carrying, I believe, geriatric oncologist, and I'm very interested in your response to this, largely because I know how important Arti was to your development as well. So just tell me a little bit about your initial sort of trajectory.
Yeah, I first want to say thank you for inviting me, and that we just crossed the 150 number for the number of participants that are on this call, which is super exciting that there's so many people out there interested in cancer and aging. And I was looking, for people that know me, I'm very active on social media, and I was looking at social media, and I saw what came up was our first R21, R33 conference where Arti spoke was 2 years ago. And that was the last time I saw her. So this is very moving to me to be here speaking on her behalf, and whoever knew her misses her very much. So throughout my conversation today, I'll bring in how Arti has influenced me personally. We were both geriatric oncologists. She was a few years ahead of me, and like the other two panelists, I was inspired, but I probably did it at a younger age. I was an internal medicine resident, and I knew nothing about research. And when I was taking care of patients in the hospital, many of them were admitted after cancer treatment and would express decision regret for chemotherapy that they received. These were often older patients, and they were unable to go back home and live independently. And, what echoed in my mind was, if I had known this information, I may have made different decisions about cancer treatment. And that really stuck with me. Lots of what happens in our careers is fortuitous, and sort of right at the same time, there was funding available from ASCO and the John Hartford Foundation to start fellowship programs where people would be duly trained in geriatrics and oncology. And I really didn't have an idea of what that meant, but I decided to be an oncologist because of those patient experiences. And I did it late in my third year of residency, which meant I had an open year to do the geriatrics training, and I sort of fell into the fellowship program, which was the best thing that ever happened to me. And then throughout my fellowship, I was struck by how the different disciplines trained you differently to take care of patients. I often would be in geriatrics clinic and thinking about function and cognition, and see the same patient in oncology clinic where we're talking about survival and risk and side effects of treatment, and my brain would function in two different ways. And that really inspired my goal to integrate the two disciplines into models of care that are comprehensive for older adults with cancer. And so I was really inspired by those patient experiences.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So I do have another question that I think, Supriya, you would be just on point to answer, but I want to check in with Lisa to see if there are any questions from our attendees that we should focus on.
Yes, we heard about networking and collaboration in several of the answers from our panelists. So a participant asked, how do we learn to collaborate well, and what does a successful collaboration look like?
Who do you want to take that, Lisa?
Well, we heard Kerri talk about it first, so let's go to her.
Yeah, I think it takes a little bit of bravery when you're young to feel like you can reach out to people who are experts in your field, and particularly people who you may not have met before. I find, one of the things I'm really grateful for about working at Oregon Health and Science University is that people are very collaborative and very kind. And so, my early interactions were with Eric Orwell, who many of you probably know runs the Mr. Oz study, the large study of osteoporotic fractures in men. And I sought him out because of my primary field and being at OHSU for some mentorship and for some guidance along the way. Even though I was a little bit intimidated at the time, but then you find out that, people are generally very kind and very interested and willing in corresponding with you and potentially in working with you. So I developed some local networks, I think, first, and that really helped me kind of engage in that collaborative process. It was nice when people are local because you can have frequent interactions with them and you can really kind of stop by their office, or you see them around campus. And so I think that was an easier way for me to start to initiate collaborations with mentors or people with much more expertise than myself. And then start to ask them, are you willing to be a co-investigator on a small grant application? And then you start to develop your team and maybe your confidence a little bit at being able to reach out to people and ask for some of their expertise.
Anyone else want to chime in on that particular question?
Yeah,
I can-
I'll comment. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Irwin.
You go first.
Oh, thank you. So I'll echo what Dr. Winters-Stone said. Collaboration is so key in cancer and aging research because no one has all of the expertise to make the research successful. It's really important to work with others that can complement your own skill set. And I think that happens early on, sort of recognizing what you're capable of, what you're interested in, what you bring to the table is really important. And if you have a good research idea, even if you don't exactly know where you're going to go with it, reaching out to others to talk about it is always okay. We all are talking to people all the time at every level. And if you have passion, people will hear that and want to help you. No matter how busy I am, I'm always like, I have enough mentees, I'm good. But if someone comes to me with a good idea, I really just can't say no, because it's so exciting to work with people who are interested in that idea. So I would say be confident and be prepared. Make sure, it's always more effective to come in with an idea and have had some background into it and have a plan, and then have reasons why you're meeting with that person. So it's not sort of too open. It makes sense to that person that you're meeting with.
The only thing I would like to add to that is just how surprisingly so many collaborations are just spontaneous, that you have an informal interaction with someone in the hallway, the elevator, in an airplane. And people that I've worked with for a long time, I remember sitting next to a person that actually trained me in medicine. And we were stuck in the air and we ended up talking. And I found out this great study that he was doing, and we began a collaboration that lasted over 10 years, that actually led to the shingles prevention trial. And we're looking at a depression sub-study, and that was just completely spontaneous. But I think getting yourself out there and approaching people with the ideas that you have, I'm very much into sharing ideas. I think, it's very important not to be protective of your ideas, because each is great ideas, and you can approach people with your ideas and sort of test them out. But approaching people with humility and also listening to their feedback. I think that listening component is so critical to develop really good collaboration. So it is a dialogue and interchange, and there's mutual respect. And so it's like so much else. There's a chemistry between people that allows that work to progress naturally and dynamically.
Can I add one thing really quick, that I would also suggest that you keep your mind really open and be really curious about other people's work that maybe seems very distant from your own, because there may be another time in which it creates an opportunity for you to flush out and develop a very innovative idea. And one example for me was down the hall from my office was a health psychologist who studied dyads and particularly end of life care and communication. And I thought, well, I'm an exercise scientist. I do intervention work and efficacy work. And I respected what she did, but I never thought our paths would cross. And then, at one point, we started conceptualizing bringing intimate partners into our exercise interventions as a way to kind of support survivors and maybe promote caregiver health and relationship health. So I ran over and knocked on her door and I said, hey, what do you think if we actually had spouses exercise with their partners who have cancer, and we could address all three of the problems at once? And so I never thought I'd work with her, but over time we kind of had this crazy idea and she was the perfect person for it. So I would be curious, kind of broadly curious about what people do.
That's great. So we're at 1:27, and I know that this is a grant writing webinar. So can you guys share a little bit about your particular grant writing process? How do you get it started? What are the things that really facilitate your progress, and what are the challenges? Mike, why don't you take this one first? 25 years and 30 grants later, you've got to have some great stories to tell.
Well, how to begin? So yeah, I think, it comes out of an idea, and I do test ideas on people, and people that, just neighbors, I hate to say it, I talk to people and I say, oh, ask them certain things. And if there's like an aha experience, like, oh, that sounds really interesting, then I know that that's something that it's challenging. I think that's one level that I start, but I also read very broadly, and sometimes I'll have an idea and I think, oh, certainly that idea's been done, that research study's been done. I discover when I read it hasn't been done, that people have been talking about it, or maybe they haven't even been talking about it, and it sort of is something that we now need to do. And I'm always really struck by that. You can't believe, you have an idea, you begin to read, and you find that it hasn't even been approached. So after that, and I have an idea, I really began to query the data that I have and develop a preliminary database that is going to be part of that grant, either stuff that I've written on and how to integrate it to tell the story that I want to tell in that grant that supports the hypotheses. So that's the balancing, supporting the hypotheses with the preliminary data, but also demonstrating to the reviewers that the study that you're proposing is unique and hasn't been done yet, and that important gaps that study will fulfill. And I think that's something I always keep in mind when I'm writing a grant. I'm telling people about what's been done, but what hasn't been done, and why this study is going to fill that niche. And I do that consistently in the background section, significance section, innovation section, and then the approach is, has to be very airtight. And one of the things that I do, I have to approach it with like this high level of enthusiasm, and that has to come through in your writing, just how enthusiastic you are about that grant. But then that's balanced by this other part of your brain, which is this really obsessive, critical nature. So you present something and then you take the reviewer standpoint about why that's not going to work and why that's a problem, and you have to defend it. So it's this back and forth that particularly comes through in the approach section. Everything that you're doing is then justified, and so you're describing the thinking that goes into the grant and the decision making that you made. The reviewers may not agree with the decision making, but they can see that you're approaching the problems with a great deal of rigor, and so your rigor scores will be very high as well. So those are the kinds of steps that I take. This takes months. I mean, it doesn't happen, It doesn't happen quickly. I spend a lot of time writing grants, and put things aside and start again and back and forth. So typically 6 months. I don't think I ever write a grant much less than 3 to 6 months, in that range.
Perspectives from our other invited speakers?
I'll comment. I really appreciated your response, Dr. Irwin. I think what came out from his response is how organic the grant process is. It is a lot of the most part of grant writing is the thinking. It's not the actual writing. It's you think of the idea, and then you got to think about what your aims and your hypotheses are, and then you go back to the literature and you try to figure out what's there and what's not there. And I feel like one of the challenges when I see people who come to me about their grants and want me to provide feedback, it's often that people are writing grants for the sake of the grant or sake of a deadline and not actually for the research itself. And they have sort of these, people have like, well, I need to get this in by October, or I need to get this in by February. And grant writing really doesn't work that way. It's done when it's done. And when you have all of the information you need to convince the reviewers that they should fund you because you're the best person and best team to answer that question, and that they really believe that that question needs to be answered. And so that takes time. And I agree with Dr. Irwin completely. I do not, it takes me 6 months to a year probably, and it's staggered. And it's often I'm writing and I'm like, oops, I don't have that. And I have to go back and get preliminary data. And then I start working on something else while I'm waiting for that preliminary data to mature. And so it's very sort of fluid and organic. And I also say when we talked about collaborations, often when you're writing a grant, you'll realize where you need a collaboration or someone else's preliminary data to support either the methods or approach or something that will help explain the grant. And so that's another place where you start to bring in team members as you write and think about it, where the gaps are.
Yeah, I agree with everything. Great advice. Agree with the timeline. I'd say the other couple of things that I might add are that you have to be you have to be a bit of a out of the box thinker. And one of my first grants that didn't get funded, I think I was too much of an incremental thinker. And I was too worried about making sure that I talked about every single paper that had been done and all of these kind of cardinal sins. And I didn't really excite the reviewers. I was maybe not brave enough to think a little bit outside of the box. And I think that comes back to interacting, getting outside of your comfort zone, meeting people that aren't necessarily in your area to kind of give you a little bit different approach that might wake a reviewer up and kind of get them interested because they hadn't been thinking that way. And then the other thing I would suggest is to seek out as much peer review and as much critiquing as your ego can take, because it's going to be worse when your grant goes to study section. That, we really just have to put our ideas out there. I think that's been brought up before. Put our grantsmanship and our grant writing skills out there and learn from people who are willing to give you that critique and feedback before you submit it to NIH or another funding agency, because you'll benefit so much from getting the feedback. Many people who are already reviewers. So whatever mechanisms you have at your institution to put your ideas out there, to get them critiqued, to get the feedback, particularly from people outside of your immediate circle who may be, a little bit nicer to you, but to put yourself out there and to really take that feedback in and figure out how to make your grant stronger.
Wonderful. So what I've heard you all say in a nutshell is, it takes time to convey a compelling scientific story, right? You need time to develop that narrative, and that narrative is not only about your own excitement about your idea, but it's also counterbalanced by sort of the data that are already out there, doing some real critiquing about limitations, and yes, I've thought of that, and this is the way this is why I'm proposing this and not that, and the power of letting go of your baby and having other people read, reflect, and give you constructive feedback. All right.
And so we have a couple related questions from the audience, and a couple questions that pertain to mentorship and mentorship during the grant writing process. So maybe I'll ask Supriya this question. How do you find a good mentor, and what role should a mentor play in a new investigator's grant writing process?
So I see from the poll that there's a lot of trainees and early career folks on this call. So I'm going to gear my comments to that group. So for people who are pre-K or thinking about career development awards, I will say that career development awards take as much time as R01s, and I think it's a very busy time in life. You know, a lot of people are coming into new jobs, new families, moving, but, you know, there has to be some structure where you build in time over time to make sure that all of the pieces for a career development award are in place, and that includes mentorship relationships. Reviewers very much look at who your mentors are as a team, not just one mentor, and what your relationship with them is, and that includes showing that they're involved in your preliminary data and papers, and that it's not a mentor that maybe just started working with you 2 months ago. I can talk about personally, I work very closely with mentees on their grants, and I meet with them regularly. It's their ideas, their passion. They're responsible for their writing and their time, but I do provide feedback and guidance and help support with getting preliminary data. And I do not do it by myself, because each of my mentees has a team of people, and those other mentors and advisors are carefully selected so they complement my skills. I have mentees who are looking at biologic markers, which is not my strength, and so they're working with people in the labs to do that. Or I have people who are looking at exercise science, and they're working with exercise scientists. But I can provide sort of a broad overview of cancer and aging and geriatric oncology. Again, with chemistry, you have to like your mentor, and your mentor has to like you, and you have to like working together. It has to be fun. You should be getting something out of that relationship and not feeling like you're pushing and you're not getting a response. I have switched mentors several times myself, and I've never had one mentor who gave me everything I needed for anything, basically. The other part of it is peer mentorship. Early in my career, there were no geriatric oncology mentors, and there's still very few people. And so you can have a geriatrics mentor, an aging mentor, and an oncology mentor who will learn from one another. You might be bringing them together, but work with your peers or people in our community to help with a geriatric oncology piece. And I worked with the founders of the Cancer and Aging Research Group, Arti, William Dale, Bill Tu, Tanya Wild, Heidi Kleppen, and we became a peer group of people who really worked together over time to provide feedback. And in some ways, those were more impactful to me in my career than even the senior mentors were. So find mentorship where you can find it, is where I'll say, and where it's working for you.
Any additional thoughts on that question?
I think when you went to find a mentor, you need to find, it's not just those quality of the scientists that you're seeking out, because people are sometimes superb scientists, but they're not very good mentors, quite frankly. So you need to look at their track record of mentoring people and their generativity. And you can gauge that in part by the people that are working in their labs and the career development that those people have shown and where they're at. You can ask those questions of the mentor. You can discover that yourself by going through, who they've worked with and follow up where those people ended up. The other thing that you can do is also get a gauge as to how open that person is to, to have you work on your own projects that are complementary to what may be going on in that person's laboratory. The other piece that I want to add is that even though, you get gray hair and you're old, which frankly, I thought I feel old, but sure, I've got gray hair, I'm still being mentored, and there's a bunch of people that are teaching me things that I don't know anything about. And I think we're all in that place where we're walking into these scientific relationships and discovering things about each other, but also things about the science that we never knew before, and bringing something unique to each of those, each of those conversations. So I think that's something that you should also look at with your mentor, that it is not just answers all the time. It's really a process of mutual discovery and I guess valid exchange of ideas and respectful exchange of ideas. I'm using respect a lot lately because I think it's so important to listen, and I love that you're opening this compassion that you need to have with people, and kindness, and that comes out of that respect, and I think that's so fundamental to any of these working relationships.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to piggyback on this, because I remember the first time that I met Arti. We were in Italy at a SIOG conference, and she was as interested in me and my mentorship experiences and as I was in hers. I mean, it's so I think, Mike, your perspective on a mentor who they themselves still understand for themselves the value of being mentored, right? I think is just a remarkable quality, right? Because it shows that that person still understands that learning and development is truly a lifelong process, and that they can learn as much from peers or even those that are older than they about how they move forward in their own work. So that was a brilliant insight for me. Kerri? Dr. Winters-Stone, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think everything, I don't have anything to add. I like Dr. Mohile's comment of find mentorship wherever you can, and you should always be seeking it out. Or you're always gonna, every meeting you're in, every person that you interact with, you're looking for qualities that you want to embody, and as well as, there's informal mentoring and there's formal mentoring too, but always having kind of that learning, attitude toward what can you learn from the people that you interact with.
So Lisa,
I'll just add one more. Paige, can I add one more?
Sure, of course.
Sometimes your, early career faculty are in a place where the mentorship is just difficult for various reasons. It's hard to find people who can help, and in those. And there are rules, right? There's sort of rules that you need to have a mentor who's R01 funded. You need to have a mentor that's local to be able to be competitive for NIH K awards. So those things are real rules, because people will look at that from the review panel perspective. But I want to empower everyone on the call that if you are looking for mentorship, it's really about the mentoring team. So everybody on the team needs to be able to provide you with feedback and help. And even you can externally solicit feedback through different networking structures that are available now to get input on grants. So there's never going to be one mentor-mentee type of thing anymore. I mean, I don't really believe in that anymore. Certainly that you might have one point person, but what you need is going to come from multiple people. And so even if your primary mentor is there because they're R01 funded, and you need to have them there for that reason, the other team members can really help a lot still.
Thank you. Well, Lisa, I know that we have 15 minutes. So
we have several questions about the review process. So I think one of our questions that we had on our sheet maybe encompasses a lot of these questions. Maybe I'll go to Dr. Irwin first. Can you describe a notable experience with study section comments and addressing study section comments? Did you ever change course completely in response to reviewer comments?
I'm not sure I ever changed course completely, but I listen to those comments. I mean, I really try to be responsive to everything that a reviewer brings up and take on the perspective of putting myself in their shoes and I'm trying to understand. Because sometimes it's hard to discern what the concern is by how the bullet points may be written out. So you need to put yourself in their shoes and try to understand why they have that particular impression and either provide an education or revision that is responsive. So those are the things I do. I mean, sometimes it doesn't work, you know, and just because I have a lot of grants doesn't mean that everything works, because sometimes it doesn't work. And it's gone through, 2 reviews and it gone maybe back as a new grant, and it still doesn't work. I try, you just don't know why that is. And sometimes I'm always shocked by that because things I think are really great grants have not gotten funded. So I think there's getting a match between the grant and the reviewers. So you don't know how that's going to work out. But I think it's a conversation, and I'm trying to educate and communicate and listen to them. And it just is a conversation that's sometimes occurring over 18 months before the grant's funded. And then there's vagaries in the funding process. You may have a great score and for whatever reason, there's no money that year to fund that grant. The pay line's been shifted or whatever. And I think that's where the opportunities to work with NCI staff, and I really think Paige has been just superb as a person that has been championing research in this area. So able to talk with the program staff about why this study is so important and how that funding priority can be articulated to the leadership at NCI. Those are also really critical steps in that process.
I would add, I think that's really great advice. I would add that, you have to do a little bit of reading of the tea leaves and see whether or not your reviewers were excited by your idea, but they just weren't quite there yet. And usually then your approach gets picked apart as a way to not get it through. But if you can sense the enthusiasm, you're significant, you're innovative, but you didn't make the pay line for whatever reason, I guess my advice is to listen to the reviewers, like Dr. Irwin said, try to educate them, seek out guidance from your co-investigators and your collaborators, and in forming your responses, but don't give up. Our one of our clinical trials right now, I hate to say this, but it got reviewed 6 times. The concept did. So that's many years. And in the middle of that, we went and we collected preliminary data. We actually did a cross-sectional study because I couldn't convince the reviewers that falls were a problem associated with anti-androgen therapy in men with prostate cancer. So we had to go collect the data. It took 6 months or a little bit longer, but eventually we did get funded because I knew in talking with men and working with these men that this wasn't just an issue of aging, that falls were really happening. It kind of goes back to knowing your patients, knowing your participants, and feeling really passionate that at some point we're going to get this funded and we're the right team to do it. But we just had to keep whittling away at what the reviewers were concerned about and fix those problems.
Yeah. Perseverance. You've got to persevere and believe in your idea. If you have an idea that is significant and impactful, to how to communicate that to people so they can get it. And they're just ideas that you can see people haven't done, and you just have to persevere.
And there may be times when you also let an idea die. And it makes room for other things.
Like, it's very sad, but you have to sort of say, you know what, that is not a great idea. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think that, for those of us that write grants a lot, the summary statement becomes so important. And with the summary statement, it's about significance and innovation. And if the review panel really has significant concerns about those two areas, either you're not communicating it very well, or you have to get data from clinicians, patients, caregivers that really communicate why it's a problem before you resubmit, or it's a study idea that doesn't move forward. But if it's about the approach, you really have to listen to the reviewers, and it's more common than not that listening to reviewers actually helps your science, and your science ends up being better by listening. And I will echo what Dr. Winters-Stone is. If you ask for feedback from lots of different groups of people, it would be unusual for a critique to come up that you weren't expecting. And building time into your grant timelines to do that is very important.
Thank you. Thank you. So I see that we have about 9 more minutes. And given that we have predominantly junior investigators and trainees, I think we should spend our last 8 minutes really getting from you, your last nuggets of advice for early career investigators who are contemplating, pursuing a research program in cancer and aging or geriatric oncology. So if you could tell your, I don't know, 21 or 22-year-old self what you should have known then that you know now, what would it be in terms of, pursuing this path?
I can start. I'll just say this is an incredibly, fulfilling area of research at the intersection of cancer and aging. There's so many gaps out there in terms of how best to care for older adults, whether it's survivors, whether it's people with advanced cancer, whether it's a therapeutic treatment, whether it's a cancer control or care delivery issue. We just don't know what we're doing. And I think that's really, it creates a lot of opportunity. And it is also so important to older patients with cancer and their families. And so that's really what it keeps inspiring me and why I continue to do what I do and continue to train. And if it's something you really believe in, you can keep doing it. And as Dr. Irwin said, persevere. Over time, things will hit, because if your passion comes through and you're working at it, it will work. All of us have gone through many failures. I just had a not discussed grant that I'm trying to decide whether it's going to apply. It happens to all of us through our whole careers. But if you think about the end goal, which is really improving outcomes of older adults with cancer and their families, that helps the rejection, and it helps us get through that. So I just wanted to say, just please keep working on it. Think of this area if you're not working in this area. There are lots of also other opportunities out there, resources, the Cancer and Aging Research Group, ASCO, the Deprescribing Network, ClinStar, PCRC, lots of different organizations and infrastructure that's now available to assist and help you learn more about what you might want to do.
So I'll jump in. I think it's so important that we read. We read very large, diverse literatures. And I think not all of us do that, and also historically read stuff that has been published more than 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that reading's important because in the quiet of that space of thinking about, what you've read and trying to understand what's not been done, will come through with the big question that hasn't been answered. And what's the big problem? What's the big issue that needs to be addressed? And I really do say big because what's going to make a huge difference in the care of patients or in public health? And then I think the next step is like, okay, so now you have this big question. How do you break it down into 5-year increments that can get funded by NIH or developed over a lifetime, a career lifetime? And so those are the things, those are the challenges, because I think when a mentee is coming to work with me, or I'm, helping them find a mentor, I'm asking what are they broadly interested in, what's the big question, and then the goal, next goal is what can we actually do within a 5-year period of time, and to make that project feasible. So once again, this kind of idealism and then the pragmatism that needs to be balanced. Those are the things that I think are really important. And just being open to that conversation with yourself and with others.
I think, yeah, just a couple of things I would add is that you've got to prepare yourself for rejection, and you can't let that discourage you, because for some reason we all signed up for this. Our papers get rejected, our grants get rejected, and it's sometimes it can be hard not to take it personal or not to get rejected. I think, we all take 24 to 48 hours and have a pity party, and then you get back on your feet and you kind of come up with a winner attitude, and you think, well, they just, I will show them that this is an idea worth funding. So I think you have to be kind of tenacious, and you can't let people discourage you from your good ideas, and your passion. So I would just kind of stay strong. And again, I would encourage people to be nimble, to be kind of flexible, a little bit nimble. Don't get so rooted in your single idea that you can't see something else that might be more novel and more interesting, and quite frankly, more fun than kind of the straight line path that you've been in. So, don't be afraid of maybe doing something that's a little bit outside your comfort zone, because it might end up being kind of the next interesting line of questioning that you want to pursue, and maybe the door's more open there than in another place.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Being nimble. You get fixed to your ideas and you think, that's what I want to do, and you're told that's not all that interesting. And there's tremendous opportunities in other areas. And actually, that's why I got into began working in the area of cancer. It's like, oh, what I'm doing in the area of depression and for National Institutes of Mental Health, they're not interested in it, but NCI was. They're interested in these factors, and that was just a tremendous sort of being nimble and thinking about how to take my interest and align them with pragmatic goals to support the research and move the field forward. So it is that you have to have a strong passion, but also be able to shift and take that passion to another playground, so to speak.
Yeah, and you might need 2 or 3 ideas going at once that you're pursuing, because one you may hit a roadblock, but the other one's moving forward. So you have to be comfortable having a lot of ideas that you're curious about.
And I think the 3 of you have exemplified that exceptionally well. I mean, in each of your stories, you transition from one focus to another. And I'm sure that at some point in your career, you may transition to another. So it is about being fluid and having the need and the interest dictate, right, what you're investing in. So we have 1 minute. Elisa and I want to thank the 3 of you so much for spending the time with us, for supporting our goal of making sure that NCI, through our work, continues to sort of just move Arti's legacy forward. And I know that Supriya, you pulled together a number of resources that those that are in attendance might want to consider. And you mentioned a few of these during one of the points that you were making. So we will make this resource list available on our Cancer and Aging Trajectories website. And if there are other resources that individuals have put into the chat, we can add to this as well. Lisa, are there other housekeeping or concluding remarks that we should say except for thank you?
No, I echo thanks to the panel. And I also want to remind people who are still on the line that we do have another webinar scheduled in our series on November 2nd at noon Eastern time with Garnett Anderson and Elizabeth Feliciano.
Yes. So the last thing that I'll say is, make sure that if you have additional questions and you believe NCI program staff can help you, we are here to help you navigate the process and really to help you be successful. So do use us as an additional resource. And thank you, Dr. Kerri Winters-Stone, Dr. Michael Irwin, and Dr. Supriya Mohile for joining us on this very special webinar in honor of Arti. We appreciate you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.